I want to start by saying I am not a hero. I want to get that out front before anyone reads this and starts building something out of it that it isn't. I've seen what happens when people take a moment, a single, compressed, forgettable moment, and stretch it into a story about human exceptionalism. I've watched politicians quote the incident in speeches. I've seen the headlines. I've read the forum posts on the GalacticNet boards where people argue about whether I acted on instinct or training, on courage or recklessness. All of that is wrong, or at least all of that is incomplete. What happened on Kelveth-Prime happened because I was paying attention and everyone else, human and alien alike, was not. That's it. That's the whole story. But since I've been asked to give the full account in my own words, for the review board and for the archive, I'll give you the whole thing. Every detail I can pull up. Every sensation I can reconstruct from a morning that started with a briefing and almost ended with a dead queen, and a war that would have killed 10 million people before anyone thought to stop it. So here we go. I had been assigned to diplomatic security for 11 months before the Vraathi summit even got announced. Most of that time was exactly as interesting as you'd expect protective duty at embassies and consulates to be. Long stretches of silence interrupted by short bursts of bureaucratic movement, dignitaries shuffling between rooms, translators arguing over conjugation, protocol officers losing their minds over seating arrangements, the usual ballet of interspecies diplomacy, which is less like a ballet and more like trying to teach three species with completely different nervous systems to agree on what music to play. I didn't mind it. I'm built for long patience. My father used to say I had a fisherman's temperament. I could sit still for hours without it becoming a problem. Most people in protective detail burn out on boredom. They stop looking. Their eyes go soft. They start watching the diplomats instead of the exits, which is exactly backward from how you're supposed to do the job. My partner, Corporal Dis-Sawin, was the opposite of patient. She was sharp and quick, and she thought on her feet faster than anyone I'd ever worked with, but she could only sustain that kind of alertness for about 4 hours before she started to slip. We balanced each other well. On long operations, I carried the patience, and she carried the instinct. We'd been partnered for 7 months when the summit was announced. The Vraathi Dominion had decided, after 14 years of on-and-off diplomatic contact, that they were ready to receive a formal human delegation at Kelveth-Prime. Kelveth-Prime was their orbital capital, not the planet, the station. The Vraathi didn't live planetside the way most species do. They'd built the station 300 years ago and moved their court up there, and that was that. The planet below was mostly agricultural. The station was where everything happened. For a human to be invited there at all was significant. For a full diplomatic delegation to be invited, with security personnel, cultural attachés, a medical team, and 2 sitting senators, was enormous. I remember sitting in the briefing room at Terran Diplomatic Command and listening to Director Amara Osai walk us through the structure of the visit, and thinking that the scale of what we were being asked to do hadn't fully landed on the people planning it. They were focused on protocol. They were focused on dress codes and dietary restrictions, and which humans were allowed to speak first during a formal Vraathi greeting. All important things, necessary things. But nobody in that room in the first briefing talked about threat assessment. I raised it myself. "What's the threat picture look like for the station interior?" I asked. Director Osai paused. She had the practiced pause of someone who'd been trained to treat every question as reasonable before deciding whether it was. The Vraathi have provided full security guarantees through their royal guard. The Crown's personal protection unit will be on station. With respect, Director, that tells me who's responsible. I'm asking about the actual threat picture. Who's hostile? Who's been watching the summit? Are there internal Vraathi factions who don't want this happening? She looked at me for a moment. Then she looked at Colonel Harpreet, who was technically my superior. Harpreet gave me the kind of nod that means keep going but be careful. We don't have a complete profile, Director Os admitted. The Vraathi have been selective about what they share with our intelligence teams. Then we're going in a little blind. We're going in with good faith. I nodded. I didn't say what I was thinking, which was that good faith is a wonderful diplomatic tool and an absolutely terrible security strategy. I just made a note in my pad and started building my own threat assessment from the open-source intelligence we had access to. There was more there than the briefing suggested. The Vraathi are a fascinating species if you approach them with the right frame of mind. They're tall, most of them stand around 2.5 meters, and they move with a kind of fluid deliberateness that makes you think of deep-water creatures. Nothing about their movement is wasted. Nothing about them is imprecise. They evolved on a high-gravity world and their musculature shows it. Even the slightest Vraathi, even the academic types you find shuffling through the station's library archives, could probably crack a human femur with moderate effort. Their social structure is built around what translators call a dominance-grace hierarchy. It's not quite aristocracy and it's not quite military rank. It's more like every Vraathi carries a kind of social charge, and that charge rises or falls based on a combination of lineage, demonstrated competence, and something the Vraathi call Velith, which doesn't translate directly but roughly means a quality of composed authority. The ability to be powerful without being loud about it. Queen Tharessa Vel-Kaine was, by every account I'd been able to gather, the highest-ranking Velith in the Dominion. She'd held the throne for 40 years, which in Vraathi terms was not an especially long reign, but was long enough to consolidate an enormous amount of political loyalty. She'd ended 2 internal conflicts without military force, restructured the Dominion's trade agreements with the Veth Collective, and was, from what I could tell, genuinely respected by her people in a way that went beyond fear. She was also, and this part matters, extremely proud. Not arrogant. There's a difference. Arrogance is brittle. Pride, real pride, can be flexible because it's rooted in something actual. Queen Tharessa had earned her position and she knew it, and she didn't need anyone to validate it for her. That made her powerful in a way that pure arrogance never manages. The crown was part of that. Every Vraathi monarch wore one, but the crown of the current reigning queen was not a ceremonial object in the way human crowns are. It was, and I had to read several papers on this to understand it properly, a functional artifact of rulership. It contained, embedded in its metallic lattice, what the Vraathi called the Veth stone, which was a crystalline material they believed held the accumulated resonance of every monarch who'd worn it before. It was half religious object, half political instrument, and entirely untouchable. The taboo around it was absolute. I mean that literally. Touching the crown without explicit invitation from the queen was, under Vraathi law, an act of dominance challenge. It was essentially declaring that you believed yourself to be above the current ruler. The penalty had historically been execution. In the modern Dominion, it had been commuted to permanent exile and dissolution of all diplomatic ties with the offending party. No human had ever touched it. No human had been stupid enough to try. But Queen Tharessa had, apparently, been annoyed enough times by diplomats who reached toward it out of curiosity that she'd made it a personal policy to begin every major diplomatic meeting with a formal warning. Do not touch my crown. This is not a request. I had read that line in 3 separate after-action reports from previous human Vraathi diplomatic encounters. Each time it was described as delivered in a flat, quiet voice that left no room for negotiation. I made a note of it. I also made a note of the fact that the crown was elevated on a dais in the throne hall, that the throne hall had 17 entry and exit points, that the station's security architecture was Vraathi built, and therefore largely opaque to our scanning equipment, and that the summit had attracted attention from at least 4 identified parties who were not enthusiastic about closer human-Vraathi relations. One of those parties was the Veth Collective, who stood to lose trade leverage if the Dominion opened new channels with Earth. One was a human nationalist faction called the Continuity Front, who believed, in the specific way that small, loud people believe things, that diplomatic contact with alien species was a form of cultural surrender. One was an internal Vraathi faction called the Velith Pure, who held that the Dominion's racial integrity was being compromised by too much contact with non-Vraathi species. And one was an entity or group our intelligence teams had not been able to fully identify, who had been flagged primarily because of unusual signal traffic in the weeks before the summit. Encrypted, routed through at least 4 relay stations, going somewhere our people couldn't trace. Director Osei had called that one a low-confidence concern. I had called it the one I was most worried about. We arrived at Kelveth-Prime 2 days before the formal summit was scheduled to begin. The station was extraordinary. I'll say that plainly, even though I've been careful throughout this account not to let awe cloud the professional record. But Kelveth-Prime was genuinely, architecturally extraordinary in a way that hit you the moment the shuttle docked and the docking bay doors opened, and you stepped out onto a floor that was polished to a mirror finish and looked down and saw the planet hanging in space below you through transparent panels in the floor. The station's design philosophy was different from anything we build. Human stations are built around function. Every element has a purpose that you can trace. Kelveth-Prime was built around something harder to name, maybe presence, maybe authority. Every corridor communicated scale. Every chamber communicated permanence. Even the smallest anteroom felt like it was making an argument about the enduring nature of the Vraathi Dominion. I noticed all of that, and I filed it away, and I kept moving. Our delegation was housed in the human wing, a set of chambers that the Vraathi had constructed specifically for biological compatibility, with gravity adjusted and atmosphere composition tuned to human norms. They'd even included temperature controls, which was a thoughtful touch because Vraathi environments run about 4 degrees warmer than most humans find comfortable. Dissa and I did a full walkthrough of the wing first, then the connecting corridors, then the 3 primary routes between our wing and the throne hall. Then the throne hall itself, which the station's royal guard allowed us to inspect for 2 hours while it was empty. I spent most of those 2 hours looking at the ceiling. Dissa found me doing it and came to stand beside me. "You've been staring up there for 15 minutes, she said. "There's a section of the lattice in the upper right quadrant that's different from the rest," I said. "See it? The color's slightly off. The Vraathi use a specific alloy for the station's structural panels, and it has a particular reflective signature. That section doesn't match." Dissa looked. She was quiet for a moment. Then, "Could be a repair, a replacement panel." "Could be," I said, "but it's over the throne directly." We looked at each other. "I'll put it in the report," she said. "Put it high," I said. She did. We submitted the security report that evening to Colonel Harpreet, who submitted it to Director Osei, who had a brief conversation with the Vraathi Station security chief, a tall, severe Vraathi named Commander Veltorak, who responded that the panel had been replaced 6 months ago after a minor structural stress fracture and was entirely within specification. Director Osei relayed this to Harpreet. Harpreet relayed it to me. I nodded and said, "Understood." And I kept thinking about it. The morning of the summit was cold, which surprised me. The Vraathi had lowered the temperature in the common areas slightly, a concession to human comfort, the protocol officers explained. I appreciated the gesture, but the cold wasn't just temperature. There was something in the air of that station on summit morning that I can only describe as a held breath, like the whole structure was waiting for something. I've felt that before. Not often, but enough times to know what it means. It means that someone, somewhere in the environment, is carrying a tension that hasn't been expressed yet. It means something is coiled. I said this to Dissa while we were suiting up in our detail gear. "You're being atmospheric again," she said. "You always say that, and then something happens, and you always say you should have listened." "Name one time." "Kepler Station, the trade envoy who wasn't a trade envoy." She paused. "Okay, one time." "The Meridian Embassy, the assistant cultural attaché who had a secondary agenda." "That one I would have caught." "You were looking at the wrong door." She didn't answer that. She finished fastening her comm unit to her collar and checked her sidearm, and looked at me with the expression she uses when she's decided to take something seriously, but doesn't want to admit it out loud. "What are you worried about specifically?" she asked. "The panel," I said, "and the signal traffic, and the fact that 4 separate hostile parties all have reason to want this summit to fail." The Vraathi security sweep came back clean. "The Vraathi security equipment can't detect everything." "What can ours detect that theirs can't?" I told her. She was quiet for a second. Then she said, "You need to request access to the throne hall before the event starts. The Vraathi won't like that." "No," I said. "They won't. Harpreet won't sanction it." "No," I said, "probably not." She looked at me for a long time. "You're going to do it anyway," she said. "I'm going to make a request," I said, "through proper channels, politely." The request went through proper channels. It was denied. Not rudely. The Vraathi weren't rude in their formal communications, but firmly. Commander Vel-Kaine explained, through the translation system, that additional scanning of the throne hall was unnecessary given the comprehensive security protocols already in place, and that the presence of human scanning equipment in the sacred space before the ceremony would be considered a protocol irregularity. That was the phrase, protocol irregularity. I took the denial, I noted it in the log. And I went to find Corporal Wynne. "Denied," I said. "Expected," she said. "I need 20 minutes in the throne hall before the ceremony." She looked at me, "Without authorization." "The ceremony isn't for 3 hours. The hall is being prepared by Vraathi staff. I'm going to go in and look at a wall panel. That's all I'm going to do. If they catch you, it's an incident. If I'm right about what's up there and we don't go, it's a catastrophe." She thought about that for exactly 4 seconds. I counted. "I'll watch the corridor," she said. "You've got 10 minutes. If I ping you twice, you're out of time." 10 minutes is enough," I said. Getting into the throne hall was easier than I expected, which itself made me uneasy. The Vraathi staff who were preparing the space, arranging ceremonial elements, adjusting lighting, positioning the translation relay units, were focused entirely on their tasks. One of the things I'd noticed about Vraathi is that their attention is very directed. When they're focused on something, they're focused on it completely and peripheral awareness drops. It's different from humans, who tend to hold a split awareness even during tasks. For the Vraathi, concentration is almost total. I moved along the left wall, staying in the shadow of the tall ceremonial columns, and made my way to the far corner below the anomalous ceiling panel. Up close, the difference was clearer. The panel above me was marginally thicker than the surrounding panels. The alloy color was close enough that a quick visual pass wouldn't flag it, but the reflective signature was wrong at this angle, and there was something else, something I could feel more than see. A very slight vibration, not mechanical, not structural, the kind of vibration that comes from something that has a moving internal component, something that has power running to it. I took out the compact scanner I carried, a human-built unit, civilian grade so it wouldn't trigger Vraathi security systems, but calibrated by our tech team to detect a specific range of electromagnetic signatures, and ran it over my head at the panel. The readout came back in 3 seconds. I stared at it. Then I looked at the throne. The throne was directly below the panel. Exactly, precisely, geometrically directly below. If you dropped a line from the center of the panel to the floor, it would hit the seat of the throne within a margin of about 5 centimeters. The panel wasn't a replacement structural component. It was a housing. Something had been installed up there, inside the ceiling, hidden behind a false panel made of the correct alloy to pass casual visual inspection, and it was pointed directly at where Queen Tharessa Vel-Kaine would sit in 3 hours. I had 10 minutes and I'd used 6. I climbed. The ceremonial columns of the throne hall are beautiful. They're carved from a dark stone the Vraathi bring up from the planet below, and the surface is worked into patterns that represent, according to the cultural briefing, the lineage of the Dominion back through 43 generations of rulers. The patterns are fine-grained, intricate. They also provide, if you're approximately 1.8 meters tall and in good physical condition, adequate handholds for someone willing to be creative about vertical movement. I am 1.8 meters tall. I am in good physical condition. I climbed. Not all the way to the ceiling. I didn't need to. I got high enough to reach the access seam on the side of the false panel, the point where it connected to the ceiling grid, and I got my fingers into it and I pulled. It didn't come free. It was locked, magnetically sealed by the feel of it. I had a tool for that. You carry tools for things like that when the briefing has left you with more questions than answers. The seal released. The panel swung inward slightly. I looked inside. I want to be precise here, because precision matters in an incident report, and because I know this part will be scrutinized. What I found inside the ceiling housing was a compact ballistic delivery system, not energy-based, not a Vraathi weapon, human manufacture or human-influenced manufacture. The component design language was recognizable, even modified. It was a precision-guided round, loaded in a single-shot housing, with a mechanical trigger system set to activate on a specific acoustic signature. Sound triggered. Ceremonial openings in Vraathi formal events involve a specific tonal chord, the Vel-Kaine chord, played on the station's harmonic resonators. It's unique to Vraathi royal ceremony. If you wanted to build a trigger that fired exactly when the queen took her throne, during the opening chord of a major diplomatic ceremony, surrounded by witnesses from 2 species, at a moment when chaos would be maximum and confusion would be total, you'd use the Vel-Kaine chord. The round was positioned at the center of the housing, aimed down, aimed at the throne, aimed at her head. I had approximately 90 seconds before Dissaz's patience ran out. I thought about what I was looking at. If I left it, the ceremony happened, the chord played, the round fired, and Queen Tharessa Vel-Kaine died on the throne of her dominion with a human delegation in the room. The Vraathi response to that would be immediate and it would be catastrophic. Even if every piece of evidence eventually pointed away from the human delegation, the initial response in the heat of loss and shock and grief would assume human involvement. How could it not? We were there. We were the outsiders. We were the ones who'd wanted this meeting. 10 million people was probably a conservative estimate. If I reported it and waited for proper authorization and proper Vraathi security response, I was looking at a 40-minute process minimum, during which time the housing might detect the breach and trigger early, or the person controlling it remotely might detect the breach and trigger early, or someone on the Vraathi security team who was connected to the plot might suppress the report entirely. If I removed the round myself, right now in the next 60 seconds, I removed the round. It took exactly what it took. My hands were very steady, steadier than they've been during some other things I've had to do in this job. The round came free of the housing with a clean mechanical click, and I palmed it, and I backed down the column, and I was on the floor and moving toward the exit before the first of Diss's double pings hit my comm unit. I got out. I walked back through the station corridor at a measured pace, not rushing, because rushing in a secure environment draws attention, and I rounded the corner where Dissa was posted, and she looked at my face and she said, very quietly, "Tell me." I told her. She was quiet for exactly one breath. Then she said, "You have it." I opened my hand. The round sat in my palm, compact, unremarkable looking, the kind of object that only becomes significant in context. "We need to tell Harpreet," she said. "Yes," I said. "Right now." "He's going to." "I know what he's going to do," I said. "Let him do it. The round is out of the housing. That's the thing that needed to happen. Everything else is process." What happened next was, in fact, a great deal of process. Harpreet's response to my report was a very carefully controlled sequence of reactions. I could watch them move across his face in order: disbelief, concern, professional alarm, political calculation, and finally a kind of grim resolution that meant he'd decided the situation was real and he was going to deal with it. He did not congratulate me on the unauthorized entry. That came later, and it was backhanded enough that it barely counted. He immediately contacted Director Osai. Director Osai immediately contacted Commander Vel-Kaine through the station's emergency diplomatic channel. I sat in a briefing room with Dissa and the round on the table between us and waited. Vel-Kaine arrived personally, with 4 members of the Royal Guard. The Royal Guard, if you haven't encountered them, are the elite of the Vraathi military, selected for size, training, and velith in combination, which means they are very large, very capable, and very composed. They came into the room, and the room immediately felt smaller, and they looked at me, and they looked at the round on the table. The longest silence I have ever sat through followed. Then Commander Vel-Kaine said something in Vraathi. The translation unit on the table rendered it as, "You entered the sacred hall without authorization." "Yes," I said. Another silence. "You touched a component within the hall's ceiling structure." "Yes," I said. "You removed an object from within the hall." "Yes," I said. "I removed the object that was going to kill your queen." Vel-Kaine looked at me for a very long time. His face, Vraathi faces are harder to read than human faces. The musculature is different and the micro-expressions don't map cleanly, but his face showed something. I won't claim to know exactly what it was, but it was something. He reached out and picked up the round from the table. He examined it. He turned it over in his fingers. His fingers were easily twice the length of mine, and he looked at the housing design and the mechanical trigger and the sound activation component, and his face did something that I was pretty sure was the Vraathi equivalent of controlled, cold fury. He said something to the Royal Guards. They left immediately. Then he looked at me again. "This is of human manufacture," he said. The translation unit had a slight lag that made his pauses longer than they were. "Modified, but the core components are human." "I know," I said. "It was designed to look like we did it, or at minimum to implicate us in the confusion." "You are aware that entering the sacred hall without authorization is itself a serious breach." "I'm aware," I said. "You could have reported your concerns through the correct channels." "I reported them. The request was denied. I didn't have time to re-escalate through the full protocol chain, and I didn't trust that a re-escalation would be clean." The last part of that sentence was a significant thing to say to the station's security commander. It implied that his chain of command might have been compromised. Under any other circumstances, I would have softened it or omitted it entirely. Vel-Kaine did not react with offense. He looked at me for a long moment and then he nodded once, a very small and deliberate nod, and he said, "Your concern may have been warranted." That was the closest thing to an acknowledgement I got from him that day. He left, the room was quiet. Dessa exhaled slowly. Well, she said, that went about as well as it could have. The ceremony, I said, is it going ahead? That's above our level, she said. Yes, I said, but is it? Part 2, the throne. The ceremony went ahead. They delayed it by 2 hours while Vraathi security swept every panel, every surface, every structural access point in the throne hall from top to bottom. They found 2 additional monitoring devices, not weapons, just surveillance equipment, also of modified human influencing design. Those were removed as well. The human delegation was confined to their wing for the duration of the sweep. Director Osai managed this with remarkable diplomatic grace, explaining it to the senators and cultural attachés as a technical delay, without elaborating on the technical nature of the delay. The senators, to their credit, didn't push too hard. Senators, in my experience, push hard on a lot of things, but experienced ones know when they're in a situation where pushing will make it worse. Dessa and I were kept in the briefing room while the sweep happened. We were not under arrest. Vel-Kaine hadn't done that, and I appreciated it, but we were effectively on hold while the Vraathi security apparatus processed what I'd found and decided what to do with me. I drank 3 cups of something the station's provisioning system had labeled as human-compatible beverage, category, calming. It tasted like warm paper. I drank it anyway. Dessa ran threat assessment on her pad, updating our profiles on all 4 hostile parties given the new information about the weapon. The design modification suggested a specific level of technical capability. The sound activation trigger suggested knowledge of Vraathi ceremony protocol that went beyond general awareness. You'd need inside information to know which specific acoustic signature would be used for the opening chord of this particular event. That pointed toward either an infiltrated Vraathi party or a human actor with very good access to Vraathi cultural intelligence. Continuity Front doesn't have this kind of reach, Dessa said. No, I agreed. They're loud, but they're not sophisticated. The Veth Collective has the technical capability, but why use human design components? If you're framing humans, you're Continuity Front. If you're the Veth Collective, you frame the Vraathi's own factions. Unless you want ambiguity, unless you want everyone suspicious of everyone. She considered that. The unidentified signal traffic. The unidentified signal traffic, I said. We looked at each other. There's a third party we haven't identified, she said. There's a third party that doesn't want humans and Vraathi in cooperation under any circumstances, and has the technical reach and the intelligence access to try something like this, and doesn't care who gets blamed as long as the relationship breaks down. That's a scary entity to not have a name for. Yes, I said, it is. At 2 in the afternoon, station time, Commander Vel-Kaine came back. He came alone this time. No royal guard, that was a choice, I noticed it. He sat down across the table from us. Vraathi chairs are sized differently, but he made it work, and he put his hands flat on the table and looked at me. Her Majesty has been informed, he said. I waited. She has been informed of the threat to her life, of the nature of the device, and of the identity of the individual who discovered and removed it. I kept waiting. Her Majesty requests your presence before the ceremony. Dessa made a very small, controlled sound beside me. Me specifically, I asked. Sergeant Orin Vasquez, yes, specifically. Is that a request or a command? I asked. Vel-Kaine tilted his head. In Vraathi body language, I'd learned, a head tilt is an expression of something between amusement and respect, a recognition that the question was worth asking. An invitation, he said, with strong emphasis. The Queen's private antechamber was smaller than I expected. I had expected something grand. Something that continued the architectural language of the throne hall, the scale and weight and permanence. The antechamber was none of those things. It was perhaps the size of a large office. The walls were a deep blue-gray material that absorbed light rather than reflecting it. There were no ceremonial elements, no gold, no carved lineage patterns. There was a table with 2 chairs, one large and one, a Vraathi accommodation sized for a human. Queen Tharessa Vel-Kaine was standing when I entered. I had seen images. The briefing materials included several, ranging from official state photographs to candid documentation captured by human observers at previous diplomatic events. I thought I had a reasonable sense of her. I was wrong. Images don't capture Velith. That quality I mentioned composed authority, power that doesn't need to announce itself. You have to be in the same room with it to understand what it actually is. Queen Tharessa Vel-Kaine was not the largest Vraathi I'd seen. She was not especially intimidating in any physical sense. She was, and I mean this as a high compliment, entirely, completely, perfectly at ease with herself in a way that made the room rearrange itself around her. She was wearing the crown. The Vethstone at its center was a deep violet that shifted toward amber at the edges, and in the light of the antechamber it caught and held the illumination in a way that made it look like it was lit from inside. She looked at me. I had been briefed on Vraathi greeting protocol. I had practiced it. I performed it correctly. She responded with a greeting I hadn't seen in the protocol briefings, which meant it was either something personal or something outside the formal register, something between individuals rather than between titles. There was a translation unit on the table. She gestured to it and we sat. "You entered my sacred hall without permission," she said. "Yes, Your Majesty." "You touched my ceiling panels without permission." "Yes, Your Majesty." "You removed an object from within my hall without permission." "Yes, Your Majesty." And I was told, when informed of all of this, that these actions likely saved my life. "Someone tried to kill you," I said. "I removed the means." She looked at me for a long time. "I warned your delegation, do not touch my crown." "I didn't touch your crown, Your Majesty. I touched a ceiling panel approximately 9 meters above and 4 meters to the left of your crown." Something happened on her face. It was very subtle and I almost missed it, and I am genuinely not sure I interpreted it correctly, but I think it was something like an almost smile. Not quite, but almost. "The distinction matters to you," she said. "The distinction is accurate," I said, "and I suspect it matters to you." Another long look, long enough that I became aware of the ambient hum of the station around us, the distant mechanical breath of a structure keeping itself alive in the void. "Why did you not wait for authorization?" she asked. "Why did you not follow proper channels?" "Because there wasn't time," I said. "And because I wasn't certain the channels were clean." "You suspected corruption in the security apparatus of my station." "I suspected the possibility of it, Your Majesty. I didn't know." "And you acted on a suspicion." "I acted on a probability calculation," I said. "The cost of being wrong about the ceiling panel, an unauthorized entry, a protocol breach, a diplomatic incident was manageable. The cost of being wrong about the threat, a dead queen, a broken treaty, a war was not. So you chose the smaller violation to prevent the larger one." "Yes." She was quiet. "Humans," she said after a moment. The translation unit rendered the word in a tone that was thoughtful rather than dismissive. "You reason in risk." "We've had to," I said. "We're a small species. We can't afford to get the calculations wrong." "Most species calculate risk," she said. "Very few act on the calculation the way you do." "Most species have more margin," I said. "We learned early that hesitation at the wrong moment is a kind of action. It's just an action that looks like nothing." She looked at me again with that long, measuring quality. Then she did something I was completely unprepared for. She reached up and touched the Veth stone at the crown's center, not removing it, just touching it briefly with the tips of 2 fingers. "This stone," she said, "holds in our tradition the memory of every ruler before me, every decision, every calculation, every moment in which a choice was made." She lowered her hand. "I will add this moment to what it holds." I didn't know what to say to that, so I didn't say anything. "Go prepare for the ceremony, Sergeant Vasquez," she said. "You will stand at the left side of the hall near the column you climbed. You and your partner. I want you where I can see you." "Yes, Your Majesty," I said. I stood, I gave the greeting again, correct protocol. I turned to leave. "Sergeant." I stopped. "The ceiling panel you opened, did you close it again?" "Partially," I said. "The seal was damaged when I forced it. It won't close fully." "That is a protocol irregularity," she said. The almost smile was back, a little clearer this time. "I apologize for the irregularity, Your Majesty," I said. "You are forgiven the irregularity," she said. "This time." I went back and told Dessa everything. She listened without interrupting, which is how I know she understood the gravity of it. She usually interrupts when I'm explaining things because she's already 3 steps ahead and waiting for me to catch up. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. "She touched the crown," Dessa said. "The Veth stone, yes." "In front of you?" "Yes." She paused. "I'm going to have to do more reading on that. I think it might be significant." "I think so too," she looked at me. "You know what I'm not going to say." "What are you not going to say?" "I'm not going to say you should have followed protocol and trusted the process and gone through the chain of command." "I know. Because that would have been the wrong call." "I know. But next time." "There won't be a next time exactly like this." "No," she agreed, "but something adjacent, something in the same family. And next time I want at least 5 more minutes notice before you go climbing alien architecture." 7 minutes, I said. "I can do 7. The ceremony began at 4 in the afternoon. The throne hall was full. Not crowded, the Vraathi don't do crowded. They do arranged. Every presence in the room having its designated location with specific purpose, but full of life and motion, and the particular charged quality that large rooms have when something important is about to happen. The human delegation was arranged in a formal block near the left side of the hall. Senators Marin Chen and Ikena Obi in the front, Director Osai beside them, cultural attachés behind, medical team at the rear. Dessa and I were posted at the left column, the one I'd climbed per the Queen's instructions, and I was aware the entire time of the empty housing in the ceiling above me. Empty now. Commander Vel-Kaine was posted at the right side of the hall with his royal guard detail. He and I made eye contact once briefly across the width of the room. He gave me the smallest nod I have ever seen a non-human being produce. I returned it. Queen Tharessa Vel-Kaine entered from the rear of the hall. The entire room shifted when she entered. I don't know how else to describe it. Every Vraathi in the hall, dozens of them, all of them high-ranking by the markings on their ceremonial garments, oriented toward her the way a compass orients toward north. Not all at once. It happened in a wave, beginning at the rear and moving forward, and by the time she reached the center aisle and began the formal processional walk, the entire room was aligned. She wore the crown. She walked to the throne and she sat. And then the Velketh chord rang out from the harmonic resonators. It was, I will admit this, one of the most beautiful sounds I have ever heard. The Vraathi harmonic resonators produce tones that don't have human equivalents. The chord they played for the opening of that ceremony was in a frequency range that humans can hear but rarely encounter, and it hit something in my chest that I can't name, not emotion exactly, more like recognition. Like something very old in the nervous system responding to something it understood as significant. Nothing fired from the ceiling. The crown caught the light of the hall, and the Vethstone pulsed once, gently, in a color I don't have a name for, and Queen Tharessa Vel-Kaine looked out at the assembled hall with an expression of absolute composed authority. Her eyes found me briefly at the left column. She looked away. The ceremony continued. Part 3: The Aftermath. The investigation into the sealing device took 3 weeks. I was interviewed 11 times by 4 different investigative bodies: the Terran Expeditionary Corps Internal Review, the Interspecies Incident Review Board, the Vraathi Royal Security Tribunal, and a joint investigation team that included representatives from both sides. Each interview was thorough, each interviewer was professional, and each interview covered essentially the same ground from a slightly different angle. I told the truth every time. That's the easiest policy, not because I'm especially virtuous, but because the truth is easier to remember. The investigation eventually traced the device and its installation to a network that had managed to insert an operative into the Kelveth-Prime maintenance staff approximately 4 months before the summit. The operative, whose species I am not permitted to name in this document, which should tell you something, had replaced the original ceiling panel with the modified housing during a routine scheduled maintenance rotation. The weapon itself had been smuggled into the station piece by piece over several supply deliveries. The unidentified signal traffic DISA and I had flagged in pre-summit intelligence. It traced, eventually and partially, to a communication relay operated by the same network. We never got a full identification. The trail collapsed at a certain point into encryption. We couldn't break with available resources. The network was sophisticated. It had reach. It had patience. It had been planning the summit assassination for at least a year before the summit was announced, which meant it had intelligence about the diplomatic timeline well in advance of the public announcement. That last detail was, and remains, deeply unsettling. The continuity front and the Velith Pure were investigated, but cleared of direct involvement in the device. They were, in the ugly phrase the investigation used, unwitting beneficiaries, parties who would have gained from the outcome without having planned it. The Veth Collective was cleared as well. Complicated feelings about that, given their trade motivations, but the evidence was what it was. The unidentified network remained unidentified in its full scope. That file is still open. What the investigation produced, beyond the factual reconstruction, was a set of policy recommendations. Some of these were about security protocols for future joint diplomatic events, pre-sweep requirements, joint scanning authority, panel integrity verification procedures. The kind of technical lessons that come out of every near miss when you do the work properly. Some were about intelligence sharing, about the fact that the 4 hostile parties had been identified but not properly integrated into the security planning, about the gap between knowing something and acting on it. And one recommendation, the one that generated the most discussion in the review board, was about what happens when a lower-ranking field officer has a high-confidence concern that has been denied through proper channels and has run out of time. It was, essentially, the question of when unilateral action is justified. I was asked about this in every one of my 11 interviews, in different phrasings but always the same underlying question: did you make the right call, and was it yours to make? My answer was always the same. It was mine to make because I was the one standing there with the information and the capability and the seconds. Whether it was the right call, that depends on what happens next. If the device had fired anyway, or if it had been something other than what I thought it was, or if my actions had triggered an incident that escalated beyond what I could control, then no, it wouldn't have been the right call. It would have been an impulsive breach of protocol that cost us everything. But the device didn't fire, the interviewer would say. No, I'd say, it didn't. So it was the right call. It was a call that worked, I'd say. I'm cautious about conflating those two things. I'd be cautious about anyone who didn't make that distinction. I was decorated eventually. The Terran Expeditionary Corps gave me the Cross of Service with Commendation, which is a mid-tier decoration that says, "You did something genuinely good, but also technically broke the rules, so we're splitting the difference." Director Os shook my hand at the ceremony and thanked me with the specific warmth of someone who knows they're thanking you for saving them from a catastrophe they didn't know they were walking into. Dissat received a commendation for her role in the surveillance work and for post-incident analytical contribution. Colonel Harpreet said, at the unit gathering afterward, that I had demonstrated a quality of field judgment that the Corps officially discourages and practically depends on, which was the most accurate and honest thing I've heard a superior say about this kind of work in 11 years of doing it. From the Vraathi Dominion, we received a formal diplomatic communication, routed through proper channels, signed by Commander Vel-Kaine on behalf of the Royal Court, expressing gratitude for the protection rendered to the royal person during the summit. It was precise and formal, and in the language of official diplomatic correspondence. And then separately, through a channel I hadn't expected, I received a small package. It contained a single object. A fragment of the Veth stone. Small, perhaps the size of my thumbnail, set in a simple mounting with a pin clasp like a lapel piece. Not ornate, not decorated with royal markings, just the stone itself, in its shifting violet to amber depth, catching light the way light was meant to be caught. There was a note with it, very brief, in Vraathi script, with a translation below that I suspected had been done by Queen Tharessa personally, given that it didn't quite match the formal translation unit register. The translation said, "You did not touch the crown. You are remembered by the stone." I still have it. I wear it on formal occasions, which means other Vraathi who know what the Veth stone is will occasionally notice it and ask. When they do, I tell them the short version. Not this version is for the archive. The short version is just, there was a situation and I made a choice, and the Queen considered the choice favorably. Most Vraathi respond to that with the head tilt. A senior Vraathi diplomat I met at a subsequent conference looked at the stone for a long moment and then looked at me and said something in Vraathi that the translation unit rendered as, "She does not give fragments of the Veth stone. Not ever. Not in the tradition. The stone is not divisible by custom." "She made an exception," I said. "Queens do not make exceptions to the stone," he said. "They make new tradition." I thought about that for a long time. I'm still thinking about it. There's a question I get asked sometimes, in the informal versions of this account. The ones you tell people at dinners, or in the corridors of embassies, or late at night, when someone wants to understand what protective work actually feels like. The question is usually some version of, "What were you thinking when you were up on that column, with your hand on the ceiling panel, and about 6 minutes left?" And the honest answer is that I wasn't thinking very much at all. I was observing. I was calculating. I was moving through a checklist that exists in my body more than my mind. A series of assessments that happen faster than deliberate thought, because deliberate thought is too slow for the moments that require it. Was the threat real? Yes. Was I capable of addressing it? Yes. Was the cost of action, even if the threat assessment was wrong, less than the cost of inaction if it was right? Yes. Proceed. That's all it was. That three-part question and its answers, completed in about 2 seconds, and then the hands moving and the body doing what the body knew how to do. People expect something more heroic from that moment. They expect courage to feel a certain way, grand, or terrifying, or clarifying. Most of the time it doesn't feel like any of those things. Most of the time it just feels like work, like being very present in a specific moment and doing the specific thing that moment requires. The fear comes later. I didn't feel afraid until I was back in the corridor with the round in my palm and Tharessa was looking at me. And then something in my body, something that had been very professionally suspended, came back online all at once, and I stood very still for about 10 seconds and breathed. Tharessa pretended not to notice. That is one of the many reasons she is an excellent partner. The summit itself produced a framework agreement between the Terran Expeditionary Corps and the Vraathi Dominion that has been described, in the diplomatic press and in subsequent academic analysis, as one of the most significant interspecies agreements of the post-contact era. I'm not qualified to evaluate that claim. I don't do policy. I do security. What I can say is that I was standing near the left column of the throne hall when Queen Tharessa Vel-Kaine and Senator Marin Chen put their hands and appendages, respectively, on the framework document and made it official. And I can say that the Queen, in the moment after, looked across the room at me. And I can say that I held her gaze without looking away, which is the kind of thing that would have been deeply inappropriate with her crown on the throne and me unauthorized near the ceiling, but which in that moment felt like the only correct response. She held the gaze for perhaps 3 seconds. Then she returned her attention to the assembled dignitaries and the ongoing ceremony. 3 seconds isn't very long. It was enough. Part 4. What I know now. I've been asked to include, in this testimony, some reflection on what the incident changed. That's the soft part of an incident review, the lessons learned section that tries to extract meaning from events that were mostly about prevention and action and survival. I'll try to do it justice, because I think these reviews matter even when they're uncomfortable. What the incident changed, for me personally, is something I've been trying to put into words for 3 weeks. It's not about courage. I said that at the beginning and I'll hold to it at the end. What I did wasn't particularly courageous. It was a calculation that worked. Other calculations in other situations have not worked, and those don't get written up in commendations. What it changed is something smaller and harder to name. I spent 11 months in diplomatic security learning to operate in a world where humans are the small species. We're not the tallest. We're not the strongest. We don't have the oldest traditions or the most advanced technology or the most military force. In the hierarchy of the species that humanity has made contact with since the Kepler event, we are not impressive by most of the measures those species use to evaluate impressiveness. And I had internalized that somewhere. Not in a defeatist way. I'm not defeatist. It doesn't suit my temperament, but in a calibrating way, knowing my limits, knowing where humans stand, knowing that we are new to this and learning, and that the learning process requires humility. What shifted in the ceiling of the throne hall of Kelveth-Prime was not my assessment of human importance. We're still small. We're still new. We still have an enormous amount to learn. What shifted was my understanding of what small can mean in a moment that requires exactly what small means. Evolved under pressure. Constant, relentless generational pressure. Predators, climate, each other. Our history is a long series of moments in which we were not the most capable entity in a situation and we had to figure something out fast. We got very good at that. We built a cognitive architecture over tens of thousands of years for exactly the situation I was in on that station. Insufficient time, insufficient authorization, incomplete information, and a requirement to act. That's not unique to humans. Other species face constraints and pressure and incomplete information. But it's ours in a particular way. And in that moment, that particular human way of being in the world, present, fast, calculating, willing, was the thing the situation needed. Not because humans are special, because the situation asked for what we are. Commander Vel-Kaine and I have corresponded twice since the summit. Brief, formal exchanges, the kind of professional communication between security officials that stays in the lane of the professional without reaching toward anything more. In the second exchange, he wrote, and I'll include this in the record because I think it belongs here, the following. The investigation has confirmed that the device, had it remained in place, would have activated during the opening chord of the ceremony. The trajectory analysis indicates that the impact would have been lethal. I was a Royal Guard commander who did not find what you found. I will not tell you what that means to me professionally, but I will tell you what it means that you found it. The Dominion continues. The Queen lives. The framework exists. These are not small things. They have weight in the stone. They have weight in the stone. I read that line 4 times. I don't know exactly what it means in the full depth of Vraathi cultural usage. But I think it means something like, what happened is remembered. What happened is part of the permanent record of things that have weight and significance and reality. It won't unhappen. That's something. My father used to say, the fisherman with the patient temperament, that the best moment in fishing isn't the catch. It's the moment before you know whether you're going to catch anything, when everything is perfectly balanced between possibility and outcome. That moment of pure potential, before resolution arrives. I thought about that a lot in the 2 hours between my conversation with Queen Tharessa and the beginning of the ceremony. Sitting in the briefing room with the cold, paper-tasting beverage, not knowing whether the sweep would find something else, not knowing whether there were secondary devices, not knowing whether the ceremony would go forward or collapse, not knowing how any of it would resolve. Everything perfectly balanced. I don't like that feeling. I want resolution. I want to know how it ends. But I understand, a little better than I did before Kelveth-Prime, that the balanced moment is where everything actually lives. All the decisions that matter get made there in the before, when nothing is certain and everything is at stake, and someone has to act or not act without knowing the outcome. I acted. It worked. I am grateful it worked. I would act again. There is one more thing I want to include in this testimony, and it's the smallest thing, but it feels the most true. When I was descending the column, after I'd removed the round, in the last moment before my feet hit the floor, there was 1 second where I was holding the column with one hand, and the round was in my other hand, and I was maybe 2 meters off the ground, looking down at the polished floor of the throne hall, with the empty throne in my peripheral vision and the great carved columns around me, and the ceiling above with its hidden hollow, and the planet hanging below through the transparent floor panels. 1 second. And I thought not in words exactly, more in the texture of a feeling, something that translated to, this matters, not me, not the moment. Not even the life being protected. Just the fact of it. The fact that here, in the void, on a station built by an ancient species around their oldest traditions, something had tried to break something irreplaceable, and it had not succeeded. The why of that matters. The how of it matters. The who of it matters less than people think. I got my feet on the ground. I palmed the round. I moved for the exit. The throne hall was very quiet around me. It stayed quiet all the way through the ceremony, and the chord rang out, and nothing fired, and the queen sat on her throne with the crown on her head and the Veth stone catching the light.